The situation now is very grave. Now, this is no longer a living room conversation. This is truly, without exaggeration or any false attitude, will be in the future known as a point of reference in the pages of history. Because the situation has not been this grave, I would say, as most people do, since the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 1960s. This is truly very serious. The Americans, the Australians, are half a world away from the conflict in Ukraine and Russia. We, the French, are less than 2 hours and a half away from a conflict that of the likes has not been seen since 1945.
Wow.
So in Europe, the situation is a great deal more tense. No? What is extraordinary, and this is what I wanted to share with you, among other things, but in France, all the parties that are directly involved in diplomacy or that are involved in active duty in the, at least I can only talk for the French army, are terribly afraid of the instructions they receive from the Minister of Defense and of the Interior. Whenever an officer, superior officer, is to appear in the French national television, they must support unconditionally the position of NATO and the position of Ukraine, despite evidence which have been discussed and shown amongst headquarters, among which in Brussels. It is not at all what you hear. And although the media in the United States and in Europe is ever so ghastly and echoing falsehoods, there is an American judge, I don't know if you ever heard of him, gentlemen, Judge Napolitano, who has a show called Judging Freedom. And he invites people of the likes of retired Colonel McGregor, who was a hero during the Kuwaiti-Iraqi War, won. No? Also, he invites officers in the U.S. Army, such as Scott Ritter, an ex-Marine, who happened to be a nuclear weapon inspector during the Cold War, and other people such as Colonel Tony Schaefer, an ex-CIA operative. Remarkably enough, gentlemen, all these guests are echoing the same story, no? That the Americans have bet on the wrong horse. Not just the Americans, NATO. I'm a Frenchman. I'm not particularly proud of the position Emmanuel Macron and the French government has taken. That's why I thought when you invited me, when you invited us, Ron, to talk about this subject, it's very delicate. These three guests I mentioned are already under super scrutiny. It is dangerous to talk about this particular subject. It is dangerous to say the truth. Yeah. I'm game. I am game. But don't fool yourself. This is a very serious subject, and we will be in the crosshairs somehow, sometime. I for one, am indifferent. I place myself at the foot of the cross. And this was extract from a letter that Albert Pike wrote to another famous Italian Freemason, Mazzini. And he said the following: the First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the Tsar in Russia and of making that country a fortress of atheistic communism. The divergences caused by the agentur of the Illuminati between the British and Germanic empires will be used to foment this war. At the end of the war, communism will be built and used in order to destroy the other governments and in order to weaken religion. That was for World War I. This is an exact description in beautiful words of what happened during World War I, beginning with the 1917, the October coup, which saw the execution of the Tsar and the imperial family. The Second World War, he continues, the Second World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascists and the political Zionists. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed and that the political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel in Palestine. During the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom which would be then restrained and held in check until the time when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. Now, this is where it really, for us, for people of our time, this is getting very interesting. The Third World War. He stated, the Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agentur of the Illuminati. Agentur is a term meaning to describe the agents, the representative of the Illuminati. Caused by the agentur of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the State of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on the issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and of the bloodiest turmoil. Then, everywhere the citizens, obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries, will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitudes disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will, from that moment forth, be without compass or direction, and will be anxious for an ideal, and without knowing where to render its adoration. It will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out in the public view. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. This is extraordinary, and this appeared on the National Museum of London, and mysteriously, the copy of this letter issued by Albert Pike to Mazzini mysteriously disappeared and was never found again. But some people, and this copy is intact, it's absolutely confirmed and corroborable. So, but it's extraordinary, the terms Nazism in a time before World War I, the description of the First World War, the Second World War are absolutely flawless. And I finish by simply saying that with other apparition sites, not the contemporary, which Jimmy is an expert of, but of the old ones, which I'm, being of the old school, know more about, a war, a conflict will come forth, not really from the Eastern European continent, but indeed from the Middle East and from Asia. The war that is taking place today in Eastern Europe will not be the cataclysm, but will follow through and merge into what is yet to come. I'm friends also with Glenn Hudson. I spoke briefly with Daniel O'Connor as well. I know there's been a conflict about the subject on the Third World War. I like both gentlemen, notwithstanding, according to different prophecies that among which I wrote in my book with Marie-Julie Jany, with a particular mystic priest in Quebec. Anyway, from various apparition sites, not just these two. But it appears that indeed the warning will take place before the regional or world conflict will take place. But the fact of the matter is those regional conflicts, such as the one in Europe, have the potentiality of developing such proportions that they are comparable to the Second and First World War together. Now, we're not talking, we're living in a completely different time. This is no longer World War II. The tactics are not the same. But in response to your question, the warning is supposed to take place before all these events, the Third World Conflict or regional, overall, as the Virgin Mary says, the universal war, and as the way she said it in La Salette, will take place. And I'd like to finish briefly with one particular point about prophecy. Now, prophecy, when I used to work with Father René Laurentin, for the few years I had the immense privilege of working with him, there is one thing that I always observed him to do, and he profoundly had a horror about prophecies because they're always subject to change. A prophecy is not something that will happen regardless or no matter what. It is not fortune telling. A prophecy, like in Nineveh, among other places, no, is a forewarning. It's an admonition of sorts. Like in Fatima, you'll remember in Fatima the version was very clear. If man does not return to my son, a second world war worse than this one will take place, and Russia will spread her errors. That is at the conditional tense. It is not a statement that that will happen no matter what, regardless. Every single prophecy from every true apparition side is the same. These particular messages are not meant to frighten us or to even give us an ultimatum. They are meant to tell us with a loving voice of an imploring mother, children, change, convert before it's too late. If you do not, these will be the consequences, not of the will of God or of his supposed cruelty, but because of humanity's and man's sins. So every prophecy that we hear or read is always subject to change based on the response and the conversion of humanity. This is very important. To tell you how this whole thing with Ukraine started. There was such a thing you'll remember a few years back as the Minsk Accord that took place between the Vladimir Putin, Vladimir Zelensky, Emmanuel Macron, and the Chancellor of Germany. These particular agreements, this Treaty of Minsk, was supposed to protect the Russian-speaking people of the Donbass from who wanted to separate from the new Ukraine Republic, which was illegitimate since the democratically elected president was ousted in 2014 with a coup. And these Russian-speaking people in Donbass didn't want to be part of this, and the majority rules, and that's what democracy means. And therefore, they wanted to be independent and not be part of a republic that was not their identity, their culture, their history. So the Accord of Minsk was signed with France and Germany promising that indeed Ukraine would not attack anymore the Ukrainian Russian-speaking people of the Donbass. And that treaty was again and again and again violated, with artillery brought to the border and killing thousands of civilians. And if anyone, and I know there will be a lot of people, if they are not already, that are watching this show, anyone doubts this, I defy anyone to show or prove the contrary. This is what happened. And this is what originally, when Russia realized that this situation was unacceptable, and already Ukraine, before February of 2022, was massing not brigades, but divisions on the border with Donbass, ready to invade, Russia said no more. And they sent a small force, a peacekeeping force of about 90,000 troops, although they amassed over 250 on the border. Only 90,000 were sent in, trying to push Ukraine to sign immediately an agreement to seek for peaceful terms. And they were about to. You'll remember the beginning. I think at the end of February, early March, the Ukrainians wanted to meet with the Russians. Immediately they were convinced by NATO, including by the French, by an Emmanuel Macron, who was profoundly hurt of the treatment that was given to him by Putin when he came to visit him in Moscow. The Ukrainians were convinced not to proceed on forth with an agreement. It was their duty to fight for freedom and to recover their territory, which was lost. Emmanuel Macron will always follow the politic of the law of the strongest is always the best. In this instance, he thinks it's the Americans. The fact of the matter is, as I said, this war, which has lasted now for over a year, is not just between Russia and Ukraine. It has never been. It's a war that is between NATO and Russia, because the Ukrainians, if they were on their own, they would have lost in less than 3 months after the war began. It is an army that has been trained by NATO officers, armed to the teeth by NATO nations, countries that have been fighting the Russians. It is not easy to push back and vanquish an army of NATO, because today, of all the NATO countries, Ukraine is the strongest. There was a show in France a few days ago on, I think it was LCI, which stated there was a French general retired, who said, well, look, the fact of the matter today is this. If France were to enter into a conventional war like Ukraine in Russia, we have enough ammunition to last about 11 days. Germany, 9. England, 8. France is the best prepared. Wow. But that's rubbish. 11 days?
That's crazy.
It is the truth. That is exactly what the situation is today in Europe. We're not prepared. And the Americans have barely 60,000 troops over there. And they also are not prepared, well organized. Europe is totally divided. The situation is extremely dramatic. Ukraine is almost out of ammunition, out of missile. By end of June, they will have no more. And Europe and the United States have none to give again. And the Americans are right now pressured on the other side of the world, yours, Ron, with the Chinese Sea tensions and the Strait of Taiwan. I do not understand this folly. We are going straight into a world conflict. And Russia, for those of you who know history, it's a country filled with pride. They will rather start a nuclear war than lose face and leave the humiliation of a defeat by a third world country such as Ukraine. It is very serious.